Jonathan Gray arrived at his estate in Oak Ridge, Massachusetts, well past midnight. The night was cold, and a thick fog hung over the long driveway. His security guards parked the black cars near the front gate and waited outside, leaving him to enter the house alone. Jonathan walked through the massive front doors into the quiet hallway. He was a man of immense power, ruling over his kind as the Vampire King, though the human world only knew him as a wealthy, reclusive businessman. His snow-white hair caught the dim light of the foyer, and his pale skin seemed almost translucent in the shadows. He walked with absolute silence, his boots making no sound on the polished floors. As he passed the main kitchen, a faint noise caught his attention. It was not the sound of a guard or a heavy footstep. It was a soft, frantic rustling, coming from deep inside the kitchen pantry. Jonathan paused, his eyes narrowing in the dark. He reached inside his long coat and pulled out a small, silver weapon, moving toward the pantry door with steady, deliberate steps. He pushed the pantry door open slowly, letting the light from the kitchen hallway spill into the small room. He expected a thief, a spy from a rival family, or an assassin sent to test his strength. Instead, he froze. Crouched in the furthest corner of the shelf alignment was a little girl. She looked no older than 8 years old. Her frame was small and thin, and her clothes were worn and faded. In her lap she held a half-eaten piece of dry bread and a small plastic container of leftover pasta that the kitchen staff had cleared away hours ago. Her face was pale with absolute terror, her large eyes fixed on his white hair and striking features. She trembled so hard that the plastic container clicked against the wooden shelf. She was not a threat to his empire. She was just a child, and she was clearly starving. Jonathan lowered his weapon, his gaze tracking the crumbs on her fingers and the desperate way she clutched the discarded food. The kitchen was completely silent, save for the sound of the girl's shallow, terrified breathing. Jonathan stepped closer, his tall figure casting a long shadow over her corner. The little girl shrank back, trying to push herself through the solid wall. She moved her hands behind her back, attempting to hide the food as if protecting the scraps would protect her from whatever punishment was coming. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes, and whispered a few short words that made Jonathan's chest tighten. She begged him, please not to fire her mommy, explaining that her mother had no idea she had followed her to work that evening. Jonathan stood perfectly still. He recognized the family connection immediately. Her mother was Lily Davis, a quiet human woman who had worked as a night cleaner at the estate for the past 2 years. Lily was a model worker, always arriving before dark, leaving after dawn, and never complaining about the heavy workload or asking for extra money. Jonathan looked down at the shivering child, realizing the immense burden this small family had been carrying in secret. He slowly knelt on the hard floor, bringing himself down to her height so he would appear less threatening. He kept his hands visible and spoke in a low, even voice that carried none of his usual cold authority. He asked her what her name was. The girl swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the open door, as if calculating her chances of running past him. She whispered that her name was Emma. Jonathan gave a small, reassuring nod. He told her that her mother was a very good woman and that nobody was going to fire her. Emma wiped her nose with the sleeve of her oversized sweater, but her shoulders remained tense. She looked at his pale face, perhaps sensing that he was different from the other men who patrolled the grounds. But the fear in her eyes began to soften slightly. He asked Emma how long she had been coming into the mansion at night to find food. Emma bit her lower lip, torn between her fear of him and the honest nature of a child. She confessed that she only snuck inside when her mother had to spend all their money on the special medicine for her chest. She explained that Lily had a terrible cough that kept her awake at night, and the doctor bills were too high. Emma's words began to spill out quickly now, a flood of truth from a child who had kept secrets for far too many months. She told him that she often heard her mother crying in their small bedroom when she thought Emma was asleep. She said Lily would give her the entire dinner and claim she had already eaten at the mansion. But Emma knew it was a lie because her mother's hands would shake from weakness. Jonathan listened to the child's story, a deep, steady anger rising within him. It was not anger at Emma or her mother, but at the harsh reality of the human world. Lily Davis was working herself to death under his roof, cleaning his grand halls and polishing his expensive furniture, while her daughter resorted to eating scraps from his garbage bins. He thought of his vast wealth, the millions of dollars that flowed through his enterprises daily, and how easily he could have prevented this if he had only looked closer at the people who served him. He saw the pure loyalty in Emma's eyes, a fierce desire to protect her mother at all costs. It was a quality he respected deeply, something he rarely saw in his own world of politics and power struggles. He realized that this child possessed more true courage than most of the soldiers who guarded his perimeter. Before he could speak again, the heavy sound of boots echoed from the main kitchen area. The door swung open further, and Thomas, his chief security officer, walked into the room. Thomas was a large, broad-shouldered human who handled the estate's external security with strict discipline. He held a flashlight in his hand, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of trouble. He called out to Jonathan, asking if everything was all right or if he had detected an intruder in the pantry area. Emma went completely rigid at the sound of the guard's deep voice, her eyes widening in fresh panic. She looked at Jonathan, silently pleading with him to keep her hidden. She knew what happened to people who broke the rules in a place like this, and she was terrified of what these large men would do to her and her mother. Jonathan stood up smoothly, blocking Thomas's view of the corner entirely with his tall frame. He stepped out of the pantry, pulling the door shut behind him until it clicked. He looked at Thomas with a calm, unbothered expression, his white hair catching the overhead kitchen lights. He told Thomas that everything was perfectly fine, and that he was merely checking the secondary locks on the storage units. Thomas paused, looking at the closed pantry door with a slight frown. He mentioned that he thought he heard a small voice or a rustling sound from inside. Jonathan shook his head, his tone firm and final. He stated it was just the old pipes in the walls reacting to the drop in temperature outside. He instructed Thomas to return to his post at the front gate and tell the rest of the men to settle down for the night. Thomas hesitated for a brief second, but he knew better than to question Jonathan's word. He gave a respectful nod, turned on his heel, and walked out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps fading down the long marble corridor. Jonathan waited until the sound of the outer door closing signaled that the guard was gone. He turned back to the pantry and opened it once more. Emma was still there, curled into a tight ball, holding her breath. Jonathan reached out and gently took the stale bread and the old container of pasta from her small hands, placing them on a higher shelf. He told her that she would not be eating garbage anymore. He reached into his coat, pulled out a clean handkerchief to wipe the tears from her face, and told her to follow him into the private quarters where it was warm. Jonathan led Emma through a hidden doorway behind the kitchen, entering the private wing of the estate where the regular staff were never allowed to go. This part of the mansion was warm, heated by a large stone fireplace that crackled with low flames. The furniture was made of dark wood and soft leather, comfortable and quiet. He guided Emma to a small sofa near the fire and told her to sit down. She placed her backpack on the floor, looking around the massive room with a mixture of awe and nervousness. Jonathan disappeared into a side room for a few moments and returned with a thick wool blanket and a small tray containing fresh red apples, a sliced loaf of sweet bread, and a glass of warm milk. He placed the tray on the table in front of her and wrapped the blanket around her thin shoulders. Emma looked at the food, her mouth watering, but she did not reach for it immediately. She looked up at Jonathan, her eyes asking for permission. He gave her a small, encouraging smile and told her to eat as much as she wanted. She did not need to be told twice. She picked up a slice of the sweet bread and ate it quickly, her hunger overcoming her manners for a moment. Jonathan sat in the leather chair opposite her, watching her eat in silence. He observed the way the warmth from the fire brought a faint color back to her pale cheeks. He felt a strange sense of peace watching her, a feeling that was entirely foreign to his daily existence. For centuries, his life had been defined by conflict, strategy, and the constant maintenance of power. This simple act of feeding a hungry child felt more important than any business deal he had closed that year. As Emma finished the bread and began drinking the milk, Jonathan began to formulate a plan. He knew he could not simply give Lily a handful of cash and expect everything to be fixed. A woman with that much pride would likely refuse the charity or feel too ashamed to continue working for him. He needed to handle the situation with care and respect. He asked Emma where she went to school during the day. She wiped a mustache of milk from her lip and told him she went to the public school 3 blocks away from their small apartment. She explained that she usually walked home by herself and waited for her mother to finish her afternoon shift at a local laundromat before they both came to the estate for Lily's night job. Jonathan realized Lily was working 2 jobs just to pay for rent and medicine. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 1 o'clock in the morning, the deep chime echoing through the quiet room. Emma's eyes were growing heavy, her small body finally relaxing under the warmth of the blanket and the full meal. Jonathan stood up and told her it was time to rest. He led her to a small guest bedroom down the hall, a comfortable room with a large bed covered in soft pillows. Emma climbed into the bed, still holding her small backpack close to her chest. Jonathan pulled the blankets up to her chin and told her she would be safe here for the night. He promised her that he would speak to her mother in the morning and that everything would be handled properly. Emma closed her eyes, murmuring a soft thank you before falling into a deep, peaceful sleep. Jonathan returned to his private study, spending the remaining hours of the night staring out the tall windows at the dark woods surrounding his property. The sun began to rise at 6 o'clock, casting a pale gray light across the estate. He checked his watch and knew that Lily Davis would be finishing her cleaning shift in the main building soon. He walked down to the kitchen, his mind settled on what he needed to do. He found Lily near the large sinks, wiping down the counters with a worn cloth. She looked exhausted, her shoulders hunched forward, and a sudden sharp cough shook her thin frame. She caught her breath and continued wiping the counter, her movements slow but determined. She did not notice Jonathan standing in the doorway until he spoke her name. Lily turned quickly, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw her employer standing there so early in the morning. She immediately straightened her posture and apologized if she had made too much noise. Jonathan walked into the kitchen and indicated one of the wooden chairs at the table. He asked her to take a seat, stating that they needed to discuss some matters regarding her employment. Lily's face turned completely white. She gripped the cloth in her hands tightly, her knuckles turning white. She begged him not to let her go, saying she needed this job more than anything and would work extra hours for free if her performance had been lacking. Jonathan realized she was terrifyingly close to tears, her survival instinct driving her to desperation, just like her daughter the night before. Jonathan sat down across from her, breaking the invisible barrier that usually separated the master of the house from the domestic staff. He told her calmly that she was not being fired, and that her work had always been excellent. He explained that he had met her daughter, Emma, in the pantry the previous night. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at him with absolute dread, realizing her secret had been discovered. She began to stammer an apology, saying Emma was a good girl who never meant to cause trouble and that she would ensure the child never set foot on the property again. Jonathan raised a hand to silence her, his expression serious but gentle. He told her he was not angry about the child, but he was deeply concerned about her health and their living situation. He asked Lily directly about her cough and the financial struggles she had been facing. Lily looked down at her rough, calloused hands, the pride she had maintained for so long finally cracking under the weight of his quiet concern. She confessed everything, explaining that her rent had doubled past winter, and the medicine for her chronic lung infection cost more than she earned in a week. She admitted that she had been skipping meals for months to ensure Emma had enough to eat. But it was still not enough. She looked up at Jonathan, her eyes filled with a raw, human vulnerability that touched something deep within his ancient heart. She told him she had nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to. Jonathan nodded slowly, his decision fully formed. He told her that her schedule was changing immediately, and her days of working 2 jobs were over. Jonathan did not waste any time. He instructed Lily to remain in the kitchen while he made a phone call to Dr. Allen, a trusted private physician who handled medical matters for his inner circle with absolute discretion. He told the doctor to come to the estate immediately and to bring a full mobile testing unit. Within 45 minutes, a dark sedan pulled up to the service entrance and Dr. Alan walked into the house carrying a large leather medical bag. Jonathan met the doctor in the hallway and explained the situation briefly, emphasizing that cost was not an issue and that Lily Davis required the best possible care. The doctor nodded understandingly and followed Jonathan back to the kitchen, where Lily was waiting nervously. Doctor. Alan conducted a thorough examination of Lily in the nearby guest sitting room, checking her breathing, taking blood samples, and listening to her lungs with a stethoscope. Jonathan stood by the door, observing the process with a quiet intensity. He noticed how fragile Lily looked under the bright lights, her skin pale and her body worn thin by months of neglect and hard labor. Yet, there was a quiet resilience about her that he found deeply compelling. After 30 minutes, Dr. Alan stepped out into the hallway to speak with Jonathan privately. The doctor's expression was grim. He revealed that Lily had an advanced case of bacterial pneumonia that had been left untreated for far too long. He stated that her lungs were severely compromised, and she was on the verge of total physical collapse. The doctor explained that Lily required immediate hospitalization in a specialized facility, where she could receive heavy intravenous antibiotics and around-the-clock monitoring. He estimated that the total cost of the treatment, including a private room and extended recovery care, would easily reach $50,000. He looked at Jonathan, wondering if the wealthy businessman would actually cover such an expense for a common house cleaner. Jonathan did not hesitate for a single second. He pulled his phone from his pocket and called his personal assistant, instructing him to arrange a private suite at the Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital under a fictional corporate account to protect Lily's privacy. He ordered that all bills be sent directly to his personal ledger and settled immediately. Jonathan walked back into the sitting room to inform Lily of the arrangements. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with anxiety, as he explained that a car was waiting to take her to the hospital. When he mentioned that she would be staying there for at least 2 weeks to recover, she immediately tried to stand up, protesting that she could not afford to miss work and that she had to take care of Emma. Jonathan placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder, urging her to remain seated. He told her that her job was completely secure and that her salary would be paid in full during her medical leave. He added that he would personally take full responsibility for Emma's care while she was away, ensuring the child was safe, fed, and taken to school every day. Lily stared at him in complete disbelief, tears spilling over her lower lids and running down her thin cheeks. She shook her head, saying she could never repay him for such incredible kindness, and that it felt wrong to accept so much from an employer. Jonathan leaned down slightly, looking directly into her eyes with a steady, reassuring gaze. He told her that she did not owe him anything, and that her only job right now was to focus on getting better for her daughter's sake. He explained that a house as large as his had plenty of room for a child, and that Emma would be perfectly looked after. Lily managed a small, trembling nod, the immense weight of her worries finally lifting from her shoulders as she realized her daughter was safe. The private medical transport arrived 15 minutes later, and Jonathan escorted Lily to the car himself, ensuring she was comfortable before the vehicle pulled away down the long driveway. He watched the car disappear into the morning mist, feeling a strange new purpose taking root in his mind. He was a creature of the night, a ruler who had spent centuries dealing with violence, betrayal, and the harsh realities of survival. This act of helping a vulnerable human woman and her child felt entirely different. It brought a warmth to his chest that he had not experienced in a very long time. He turned and walked back into the mansion, knowing that his first task was to wake Emma and prepare her for the days ahead. Jonathan walked down the quiet corridor to the guest bedroom where Emma was sleeping. He knocked softly on the wood before opening the door. The little girl was awake, sitting up in the middle of the large bed, looking small and uncertain in the morning light. She looked up at him as he entered, her eyes immediately searching his face for any sign of bad news. Jonathan sat on the edge of the mattress and spoke to her in a gentle tone. He explained that her mother had gone to a special hospital where the best doctors were going to fix her cough completely. He assured her that Lily was safe and comfortable, and that she would be staying there until she was entirely healthy again. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she asked if she would be allowed to see her mother. Jonathan promised her that they would visit the hospital together every weekend, and that she could call her mother on the phone every single evening. He told her that in the meantime, she would be staying here at the estate with him, and that she would have her own room and plenty of food to eat. Emma looked around the large, beautiful bedroom, then looked back at Jonathan's white hair and pale face. She reached out with a small, hesitant hand and touched his arm. She asked if he was sure he wanted her to stay, reminding him that she was just a kid who had snuck into his pantry. Jonathan caught her small hand in his large one and told her that she was welcome here for as long as she needed. The transition into a new routine began that very afternoon. Jonathan called a meeting with his core security staff and household managers in the Grand Library. Thomas and several other guards stood around the large oak table, looking confused by the sudden summons. Jonathan stood before them, his posture commanding and his white hair reflecting the afternoon sun streaming through the high windows. He informed them that Lily Davis was on medical leave and that her daughter, Emma, would be living in the private wing of the estate indefinitely. He issued a strict order that the child was to be treated with the utmost respect and care by everyone on the property. He warned them that any failure to ensure her safety or comfort would result in immediate dismissal from his service. The men exchanged surprised glances, but nobody dared to speak out against the king's orders. Thomas gave a firm nod, stating that they would ensure the perimeter was secure and that the child could move about the grounds safely. After the staff dismissed themselves, Jonathan met with his personal chef, a quiet man named Robert, who had worked for him for over a decade. He instructed Robert to alter the daily meal plans to include healthy, child-friendly options, ensuring there was always fresh fruit, milk, and home-cooked meals available at all hours. Robert smiled warmly, expressing his pleasure at finally cooking for a young appetite, and promised to prepare something special for Emma's dinner that evening. Later that afternoon, Jonathan's personal attorney, a sharp-dressed human named Marcus, arrived at the estate with a briefcase full of legal documents. They sat in Jonathan's private study, the room quiet, save for the scratching of a fountain pen. Jonathan explained that he wanted to establish a comprehensive educational trust fund for Emma Davis. He instructed Marcus to allocate a sum of $200,000 to cover her future tuition, books, and living expenses through university. Marcus paused, looking over his spectacles at his longtime client with a look of pure bewilderment. He pointed out that this was an extraordinary amount of money to spend on the child of a domestic worker, and that others in their business circle might view it as an unnecessary display of softness. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, his pale face expressionless but his eyes sharp and intense. He told Marcus that his wealth was infinite, and how he chose to spend it was his concern alone. He stated that he had spent centuries accumulating power and riches through force and strategy, and it was time to use those resources for something meaningful. He added that true strength did not come from hoarding wealth or spreading fear, but from the ability to protect and uplift those who could not protect themselves. Marcus realized that Jonathan's mind was completely settled, and he quietly nodded, turning his attention back to the documents and completing the legal paperwork to establish the trust without further argument. By 4 o'clock, Jonathan drove down to the local public school to pick Emma up from her classes. He parked his large black sedan near the front gates, attracting curious stares from the parents and teachers waiting outside. Emma emerged from the school building carrying her backpack, her eyes lighting up when she spotted Jonathan standing beside the vehicle. She ran over to him, her initial fear completely replaced by a newfound sense of trust. Jonathan took her backpack and placed it in the rear seat, opening the passenger door for her with the courtesy of a true gentleman. As they drove back to the estate, Emma talked animatedly about her school day, her small voice filling the quiet car with life. When they returned to the mansion, Jonathan guided Emma to the grand dining room for dinner. The long mahogany table was set with fine china and silver utensils, looking far too formal for an 8-year-old child. Emma sat in one of the large high-backed chairs, her feet dangling several inches above the expensive carpet. Robert emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver tray, placing a large bowl of homemade tomato soup and a perfectly grilled cheese sandwich in front of her. Emma's eyes widened at the sight of the meal, the rich aroma filling the air. She looked at Jonathan, who sat beside her, and thanked him quietly before picking up the sandwich and taking a large bite. Jonathan watched her eat, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that this small human child was changing the atmosphere of his entire estate. The heavy, silent halls that had once felt like a cold fortress were now filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the stone fireplaces. He found himself looking forward to these quiet moments, enjoying the simple pleasure of ensuring a child was safe and happy. He thought of Lily recovering in the hospital, knowing that providing this peace of mind for her was just as important as the medical treatment she was receiving. He was determined to ensure that neither mother nor daughter would ever have to worry about survival again. After dinner, Jonathan helped Emma set up her homework assignments at the large library table. He sat nearby, reading through his own financial reports while she worked quietly with her colored pencils. Every now and then, she would look up to ask him a question about a word or a math problem, and he would explain the answer in a patient, clear voice. The hours passed quickly, and by 8 o'clock, Emma's eyelids were drooping once more. Jonathan closed his ledgers, walked her to her bedroom, and checked that she was comfortable under the thick blankets. He stood in the doorway for a long moment after she fell asleep, realizing that his long, immortal life had taken a permanent turn down a completely unexpected path. The first weekend arrived, and Jonathan kept his promise to Emma. At 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, they drove to the Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital to visit Lily. Jonathan had arranged for them to enter through a private side door to avoid any unnecessary public attention. They walked up the quiet elevators to the top floor, where the private suites were located. When they entered Lily's room, Emma ran immediately to the side of the bed, throwing her arms around her mother. Lily looked significantly better than she had days ago. Her skin had regained a healthy color, her breathing was steady, and the deep, painful cough had subsided into a faint murmur. She held her daughter tightly, tears of pure joy filling her eyes as she looked over Emma's shoulder at Jonathan. Jonathan remained near the window, giving the mother and daughter space to reconnect. He observed the deep bond between them, a pure connection that felt incredibly beautiful to witness. Lily looked up at him, her expression filled with a profound gratitude that required no words. She told him that the doctors had been wonderful, treating her with a level of care and respect she had never experienced in her life. She explained that she felt stronger with each passing day and was already anxious to return to her duties at the estate. Jonathan shook his head gently, telling her that there was no rush and that her health was the absolute priority. He stated that the house was running perfectly well, and Emma was being an excellent guest. Emma began telling her mother all about her new life at the mansion, describing the large bedroom, the delicious meals cooked by Robert, and how Jonathan helped her with her homework every night in the library. Lily listened with a mixture of wonder and relief, her gaze shifting to Jonathan with a new level of warmth. She realized that this powerful, mysterious man was not just paying her medical bills. He was truly caring for her child with a gentleness that defied his formidable reputation. As the afternoon progressed, Jonathan stepped out of the room to allow them some private time, walking down the quiet corridor to speak with the attending physician about Lily's long-term prognosis. The doctor informed Jonathan that Lily's recovery was progressing ahead of schedule, thanks to the high-quality antibiotics and the absence of physical stress. He estimated that she could be discharged in another week, but emphasized that she would require several weeks of rest before resuming any form of physical labor. Jonathan assured the doctor that Lily would not be doing any heavy lifting or strenuous work upon her return. He had already decided to restructure the household operations entirely, creating a new administrative role for Lily that would utilize her organizational skills without taxing her physical strength. He wanted to ensure her long-term stability and well-being within his home. When Jonathan returned to the hospital room, Emma was sitting on the edge of the bed, showing her mother a drawing she had completed during her art class. The drawing showed the three of them standing together in front of the large estate gates, under a bright yellow sun. Lily smiled warmly at the picture, her eyes catching Jonathan's as he entered. There was a quiet, shared understanding between them now, a silent bond built on trust, protection, and a mutual concern for the little girl's future. Jonathan felt a strange, fluttering sensation in his chest, a feeling that had been dormant for centuries. He realized that his protective instincts toward this family were evolving into something much deeper and more personal. As the visiting hours drew to a close at 4 o'clock, Emma gave her mother one last squeeze before walking back to Jonathan's side. Lily looked at Jonathan, her voice soft and trembling, as she thanked him once more for everything he was doing. Jonathan gave a respectful nod, telling her to rest well and that they would return the following day. He took Emma's hand as they walked out of the hospital, the little girl skipping happily beside him. The drive back to Oak Ridge was quiet and peaceful, the afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the highway. Jonathan looked at the passing scenery, realizing that the cold, empty life he had led for so long was being completely rewritten by the presence of these two human beings. That evening, Jonathan sat in his study with a single glass of dark liquid, reflecting on the changes occurring within himself. He was a king who had ruled through fear, keeping his distance from the humans who crossed his path. Yet, Lily Davis had managed to break through his cold exterior without even trying, simply through her quiet strength and her devotion to her child. He found himself thinking about her smile, the gentle cadence of her voice, and the resilient spirit that defined her character. He knew that their lives were now permanently intertwined, and he was prepared to face whatever challenges might arise from his choice to bring them into his private world. The following week passed quickly, and the day finally arrived for Lily to be discharged from the hospital. Jonathan drove to the medical center alone at 11 o'clock in the morning, leaving Emma at school so her mother could settle into her new surroundings without any distractions. He arrived at the private suite to find Lily dressed in clean clothes he had arranged to be sent to her. She looked vibrant and healthy, the exhaustion that had once clouded her features entirely gone. She smiled warmly as he entered the room, her posture straight and confident. Jonathan took her small suitcase and guided her down to the waiting car, ensuring she was comfortable before they began the drive back to the estate. During the drive, Jonathan turned to Lily and explained the new arrangements he had made for her employment. He informed her that she was being promoted to the position of head of household operations. He explained that her new duties would involve managing the staff schedules, overseeing the inventory budgets, and coordinating with external contractors, completely eliminating any need for manual cleaning or physical labor. He added that her salary would be increased to 3 times her previous rate, reflecting the increased responsibility of the administrative role. Lily stared at him in complete shock, her hands trembling in her lap as she processed the magnitude of his generosity. She tried to object, stating that she did not have the formal training for such a high-level position, and that she felt uncomfortable taking so much from him. Jonathan kept his eyes on the road, his voice calm and resolute as he told her that he trusted her completely. He explained that he had observed her work ethic for 2 years and knew she possessed the intelligence, organizational skill, and integrity required for the role. He added that he did not care about formal degrees or titles. He cared about loyalty and character, qualities she had demonstrated in abundance. Lily looked out the window, a soft smile spreading across her face as she realized he truly believed in her abilities. When they arrived at the estate, Jonathan did not guide her to the servants' quarters behind the kitchen. Instead, he led her up the grand central staircase to the private residential wing, stopping before a large, beautiful suite located just across the hall from Emma's room. He pushed the door open to reveal a spacious bedroom with a king-sized bed, a private sitting area with large windows overlooking the gardens, and a beautifully appointed bathroom. He told her that this would be her new living space, ensuring she and Emma would be close to each other and could live with the comfort and dignity they deserved. Lily walked into the room, her eyes wide with wonder as she touched the soft fabrics and looked out at the beautiful landscape. She turned to face Jonathan, her eyes shiny with tears that were born of pure happiness rather than sorrow. She stepped closer to him, her voice barely a whisper, as she told him that he had completely saved their lives and that she would spend the rest of her days working to prove worthy of his trust. Jonathan looked down at her, his pale skin contrasting with the warm flush of her cheeks. He felt a powerful wave of affection for her, a desire to protect her happiness that went far beyond any employer's duty. He reached out and gently took her hand, telling her that she had already proven her worth through her love for her daughter, and that having them in his home was a privilege. At 4 o'clock, the front doors opened, and Emma arrived home from school. She ran up the grand stairs, her laughter echoing through the hallways as she found her mother waiting for her in the new suite. The two held each other tightly, laughing and crying with joy as they celebrated their reunion and their beautiful new home. Jonathan watched from the doorway, a deep sense of contentment settling over him. He walked down to the kitchen to check on dinner, leaving them to enjoy their afternoon together. He found Robert preparing a magnificent feast to celebrate Lily's return, the kitchen filled with the delicious scents of roasted chicken and fresh pastries. That evening, the three of them sat together at the long mahogany dining table, the atmosphere filled with warmth and conversation. Lily handled her new role at the table with grace, engaging Jonathan in light conversation about the estate's history and the local community. Emma chattered happily about her school projects, her small face radiant with happiness. Jonathan found himself smiling more than he had in decades, his dark world completely illuminated by the presence of the two humans. He realized that the fortress he had built to keep the world out had become a true home, a place where love and laughter could finally flourish after centuries of cold silence. 6 months passed, and the transformation of the Oak Ridge estate was complete. Inside the grand mansion, the cold, rigid atmosphere had entirely vanished, replaced by the natural rhythms of a happy family. Lily Davis had excelled in her role as head of household operations, managing the extensive property with a quiet efficiency and fairness that earned her the deep respect of the entire staff. Her health remained perfect, her skin glowing with vitality, and her laughter becoming a familiar, welcoming sound in the marble corridors. Emma had thrived in her private school, developing into a confident, bright young girl who loved spending her afternoons reading in the grand library or helping Robert bake cookies in the kitchen. Jonathan Gray found himself changing in ways that surprised even his closest associates in the business world. He remained a powerful, respected figure, but his approach to his enterprises had shifted. He began investing heavily in local community projects, funding affordable healthcare clinics and children's breakfast programs across the state, using his vast resources to build a legacy of support rather than fear. His white hair and pale skin were no longer viewed as symbols of a cold, distant ruler, but as the striking features of a generous benefactor who cared deeply for the well-being of his people. The bond between him and Lily had grown steadily, deepening into a quiet, profound romance built on mutual respect and shared devotion. One evening, as a gentle summer breeze blew through the open windows of his private study, Jonathan sat at his desk reviewing the final adoption paperwork Marcus had prepared. The documents would officially change Emma's legal name to Emma Davis Gray, making her his legal daughter and the sole heir to his vast material estate. He dipped his fountain pen into the black ink and signed his name with a firm, steady hand, completing the process they had started months ago. He looked at the completed papers, feeling a deep sense of pride and finality. He had lived for centuries without a true family, and now he had chosen to bind his life completely to these two extraordinary human beings. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts, and Lily walked into the room carrying a small tray with 2 cups of warm tea. She wore a simple, elegant green dress that complemented her warm features, her eyes sparkling with affection as she looked at him. She placed the tray on the desk and stood beside his chair, looking down at the signed documents. She reached out and touched his shoulder, her voice soft and filled with emotion as she thanked him for giving Emma a future that was secure and bright. Jonathan stood up and turned to face her, taking her hands in his pale ones, his eyes holding a warmth that was meant for her alone. He told her that the documents were merely a formality, because in his heart they had already become a family long ago. He explained that her strength and Emma's courage had saved him from a cold, meaningless existence, bringing light into a dark life that had been empty for far too many years. Lily leaned against his chest, her head resting securely against his shoulder as he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close in the quiet room. They stood together by the large windows, looking out at the moonlit gardens where Emma was playing with the groundskeeper's puppy, her joyful shouts carrying softly on the night air. Jonathan looked out into the vast, unfolding future, his thoughts turning to the long years that lay ahead of them. He knew that his immortal nature meant he would walk this earth for a very long time. But he no longer feared the passage of time, or the emptiness of loneliness. He had found an anchor in his love for Lily and his devotion to their daughter, a purpose that would guide his choices and define his legacy for centuries to come. He was no longer just a king ruling over a shadow empire. He was a protector, a father, and a partner, grateful for the desperate whisper of a hungry child that had broken through his walls and changed his world forever. The night grew late, the chimes of the grandfather clock striking 9 o'clock in the hall. Jonathan and Lily walked downstairs together to call Emma inside for bed, their hands joined in a steady, comfortable grip. The house was peaceful, filled with the quiet security of a place where every individual mattered and no one was left to hide in the shadows. As they helped Emma settle under her blankets and turned down the lamps, Jonathan felt a deep, unwavering certainty that their family would face whatever tomorrow brought with a strength born of pure love, a light that would never be extinguished. The quiet of the late night settled comfortably over the estate as the last lights in the hallways were extinguished. Jonathan stood on the stone balcony outside his bedroom, looking out over the dark expanse of the Massachusetts hills. The summer air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth from the surrounding woods. Below him, the grand mansion rested in absolute peace, a stark contrast to the cold, defensive fortress it had been for so many decades. He leaned his hands on the stone railing, his pale skin catching the silver light of the full moon high above, his white hair moving slightly in the gentle breeze. His thoughts turned inward, drifting over the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment of profound tranquility. For hundreds of years, he had viewed his existence through the narrow lens of survival and power, believing that distance and authority were the only shields against the chaos of the world. He had built walls of stone and walls of fear, ensuring that no one could get close enough to see the emptiness that lay beneath his ancient title. Yet, a single human child, driven by nothing more than love for her mother, had breached those defenses in a single night, using nothing but a quiet whisper in a dark pantry. It was a remarkable realization that the greatest shift in his long life had not been achieved through a massive battle or a brilliant political strategy, but through a simple act of mercy toward a starving soul. He understood now that true power was not measured by the number of people who feared his name, but by the number of lives he could uplift and protect with his strength. His love for Lily had given him a new heart, a warm space where compassion and purpose could live side by side with his protective instincts. He thought of the future with a quiet, steady confidence, knowing that the legacy he was building with her would outlast any material empire he had ever created. He turned back toward the warm, glowing lights of his room where Lily was waiting, ready to embrace the quiet, beautiful life they had found together in the heart of the shadows.